And we continue waking up with analog. Rise and shine. Make sure to follow the brother on Twitter. Great posts here. A lot of good learning. A lot of great discoveries. We're just talking about the first inhabitants of America. Giants in physique. Fought wild beasts and deadly combat. 25,000 and 50,000 years ago. So we're just reading the Washington Times here. This is from April 9, 1922. It says here, first inhabitants of America, giants in physique. You guys can see, we're not making this up. That's what it actually said. But what I wanted to do is actually come to the original article. This is in newspapers.com. I have an account here. This is the Washington Times Archives. This is from April 9, 1922. And again, as you guys can see, it's right here. First inhabitants of America, giants in physique fought wild beasts and deadly combat. It says here, weird relics show powerful humans erected pyramids. Mummies of prehistoric Aztecs found in ruins in New Mexico indicate giant men built monuments far more ancient and greater than Egypt ever produced. New light cast on remarkable race. Okay, far more ancient and greater than Egypt. This is ancient Egypt. That's why it's greater, because this is the original. By Dr. W.H. Balu, well-known writer on scientific subjects, okay? The first inhabitants of America, of which we have knowledge because of the extraordinary perfect mummies they left behind, are variously known as the basket makers and spear throwers. They lived underground in the Southwest, with their dead mummified and sealed potholes of chambers well below the surface. Over in the other side, before I continue, says warrior Emperor Tigrini's tomb reveals that first red-haired people in all of history dwelt in America, and that strange basket makers of prehistoric Utah were a kindred people to his tribe. Their successors built cliff houses over them, and either perished or moved along. Then on top of these cliff houses came succeeding races who erected the more modern pueblo, of which the famous Mesa Verde, constructed 5,000 years ago, is the best known type. The strange feature is that each succeeding race built a village or a city on the ruins of its predecessor, right? So they kept building on top of one another. It is more than a quarter century since the Hyde expedition unearthed mummies of the basket makers below the cliff dwellings of Grand Gulch, Utah. So again, this is below those famous archaeological sites that we know of today. So this is much older. These people they're finding, these mummies, are of an older generation. Again, we're in Grand Gulch, Utah. More ancient than Egypt. We're talking about Utah. Again, more ancient than Egypt. The Washington Times is letting you know. Naturally, certain questions have ever since been puzzling archaeologists. How did these strange people reach Grand Gulch? Whence did they come? And to what early race or branch thereof did they belong? A little more light has been thrown on these early Americans by the discoveries of Dr. Errol H. Morris. There is centered in the American Museum of Natural History the Archer M. Huntington Archaeological Survey of the Southwest, of which Dr. Clark Whistler, author of the American Indian Now, in process of a new revised edition, is director. This survey has ample funds and a very large staff, generously financed by Mr. Huntington. It issues its own publications. To Dr. Morris was assigned the task of tracing the wanderings of the basket makers and the route by which they got as far into the interior as Grand Gulch, Utah. He reasoned that he would only find basket maker remains and culture beneath other pueblos, and his discoveries have proved his view correct. In Aztec, New Mexico, he selected a great deserted city, or pueblo, of the usual skyscraper type of SUNY, New Mexico. Here we began excavations and entered cellar tombs so ancient that they make ancient Egypt modern. Again, they found tombs what? Listen to what they're writing here in the Washington Times, guys. All right, when we talk about America's the true old world, you guys see they were literally saying this in 1922. Who is older? Where's the true old world? Again, I'm going to read this part. The chambers, when they entered the cellar tombs and these excavations, right? They were so ancient that they made ancient Egypt modern indeed. I told you that's modern. That's the theme park over here. That's just a theme park over there. That's modern. The chambers he opened were sealed not less than 25,000 years ago. All right, Washington Times letting you know who was involved in this study. Scientists. This is the stuff they don't let you know. They don't want you to read. We're in part 5 of this series. Hope you guys enjoy the video and enjoying this whole series. Shout out to Waking Up with Analog for bringing these articles into our awareness. Washington Times, 1922, the chambers he opened were sealed not less than 25,000 years ago. Talking about in Utah. And the mummies within were as well preserved as when placed therein. Well-preserved mummies. His report to Dr. Whistler follows. 2 chambers are the most interesting of the numerous recent discoveries in the Aztec ruin, an enormous prehistoric pueblo community dwelling near Aztec, New Mexico. Beneath the debris adjacent to the famous Painted Room, opened in 1920, there has been found a second chamber, perfectly preserved in every detail. The pine and cedar beams in the smoke-browned ceiling are as sound as when the trees were felled, and on the wall stones the marks of the quartzite pebbles with which they were faced are as bright and fresh as if the artisan who shaped the blocks, although dead these thousands of years, had not yesterday gathered up his primitive tools and stepped out of the finished chamber. All right, do you guys hear what they're telling you in this newspaper? They never told us none of this stuff. This room was the tomb of a gigantic warrior, emperor, a giant warrior emperor who lay in solitary state against one wall, immediately back to the recessed altar in the Painted Room. The body was that of a veritable giant, 6 feet 4 inches high. I mean, that's not as, that's not a giant really. I mean, we got people like that all over the place, right? Who towered head and shoulders above the average man of his tribe. So he was taller than the rest of his tribe, right? At 6'4". Death came to the stalwart defender of the village when he was in the prime of his life, and in the height of his glory as well, if one may infer the esteem in which he was held by the excellence of his tomb and the number of his burial accompaniments. The mighty frame had been wrapped in a mantle of feather cloth and enshrouded with a mat of woven rush stems. 2 battle axes. Back of the body there were 4 magnificent pottery bowls, a cup and a basket. Upon the skull rested a large spherical vase. with a neatly fitting cover, both exquisitely wrought and ornamented. Within easy grasp of the right hand were the wooden handles of two stone battle axes, and by them a hafted knife of quartzite, as well as ships of flint and prongs of antler, the latter materials and implements for arrow making. A circular shield, 3 feet in diameter, unlike anything previously found in Pueblo ruins, covered the warrior from thigh to temples. It is an example of coiled basketry technique, the most primitive known, but usually thick and strong. The outer surface had been coated with gum and thickly sprinkled with flakes of mica. When held in the sunlight due to the numberless reflecting surfaces, the great disk would have shone with dazzling brilliance, perhaps sufficiently intense to have confused the vision of the archer, who sought to drive his arrow through the shield to the flesh behind it. Of 13 mummies found in an adjoining chamber, one was the most extraordinary which has come to light in the entire ruin. This was the mummy of an old woman who had been wrapped and bound in the usual burial position and then placed in one corner of the room. A stout splinter from a broken ceiling timber had been hewn to a point, then driven completely through the pelvis and well into the earth beneath. Ancient witch impaled. All right, listen to this. This is interesting what they're saying here. The shrunken body thus impaled presented a spectacle so gruesome that at sight of it, even the hardened excavators shuddered. It seems probable that the old woman had fallen into disfavor in the village, had been perhaps a witch, and had been subjected to this extraordinary and cruel form of torture and execution. All right, so dodge the hijack. We don't know if she was a witch. We don't know the reason, but this is what they're saying they found in here. A woman with a stick through her body, impaled. It looked like she went through a lot of torture. She was executed. That's what they're saying. This gigantic warrior, emperor of the basket makers, is well named Tigrinis. Dr. Whistler informs me that we have here the actual founders of the Aztec and Bonite culture, or the Mexica, unless later excavations prove differently. Tigrinis must stand as the first emperor of the founders of the Aztecs, whose later and wonderful structures adorned central Mexico, and a line extended toward the Yucatan, and which extended eastward on the lost continent of Atlantis. All right, extended to what? Atlantis. It is part of Atlantis. Parts of it sank, the others are still up here. Like they just said, it was all connected to here. The famed Atlantis of Plato, 250,000-year-old race. The basket makers, of which the Emperor Tigrinis was a symbol, were a Titian or Titan or red-haired race. At least all their mummies so far brought to the American Museum have reddish, wavy hair. If they were the founders of the Aztecs must be assumed to have been the first Titan to Titian-haired people on Earth of which we have knowledge. The hair color and the cross sections show positively that these first Americans never migrated here from Asia, a land of straight black-haired people. Okay, listen to what they're telling you. They're letting you know, everything they're finding here. Well, especially these red-haired giants, these were original to here. This is, again, the land of Canaan. This is a true old world right here. In the extreme north, we have the yellow-haired jarls of ancient history and the blonde types of today, but red hair seems to be a separate and distinct characteristic, not necessarily associated with the blonde hair. We have ample evidence that the ancient civilizations of Mexico, Yucatan, and storied Atlantis date back at least 250,000 years, according to these people. But they're letting you know that they're the same people, they're old, and they're the same people, forming the true Garden of Eden of the world, the true Garden of Eden. We're just talking about America over here on this side of the world, okay? Fossil skeletons of Florida, Rancha Brea, and the caves of California prove the contention of exceeding age of mankind along the American equatorial belt, and that they evolved here. They evolved here. They didn't come from Africa. They didn't come from anywhere else, Bering Strait. They were already here. Tigrinis was better armed than his followers in Grand Gulch, Utah. The latter had for weapons only throwing sticks, just strong enough to kill a rabbit. They were easy prey for wild beasts, and hence took to underground dwellings for safety. Tigrinis, on the contrary, was equipped with the most primitive stone battle axe of which we have knowledge, but it had to be effective against the beasts of his day. His shield was of coiled basketry, or coiled matting, the very first and most primitive type of basketry and matting on earth. Spirit of unrest. We see in his people the same unrest, the same spirit of adventure and desire to pioneer into unknown regions as have characterized every race of people in all times. Those that ventured northward from Mexico all perished one after another in one cave in Grand Gulch, 250 feet down from the top of the cliff dwellings. All right, 250 feet down, listen to this, in a cave was shown this tragedy of the venture some pioneers of 25,000 years ago. As deaths took place, the survivors mummified the bodies and placed them in potholes, which they dug in floors of their caverns. These potholes were lined with baked clay, and the mummies were placed in them singly, doubled up in a squatting position, chins at knees. The mummies was covered with beautiful feathers and sometimes with rabbit skin robes. Besides the men, women, and children were placed a simple, primitive type of arms, ornaments, clay dishes, and queer-looking toys. On top was placed a coiled matting is shaped of a modern woman's largest summer hat. The babes, having little coiled mats to rest upon, the tops of the potholes were then sealed with tamped sand and clay. Finally, this band of pioneers was reduced to one old woman, who had faithfully mummified the last survivor before her. When her time came, she crouched against a wall in as near a mummy position as possible and died alone within the awful silence, the last survivor. But nature was kind to her. The dry air of the cave did its own mummification in a way. Her skeleton was found with its auburn hair intact. Her face had dried with its expression of pain, grief, and sorrow. Most of her body had been preserved in the dry air through many thousands of years in a cave which had been sealed by enormous accumulations of debris from above. Aztec is located on the property of H.D. Abrams, about 2 hours ride by rail from Durango, Colorado. The skyscraping Pueblo on the rise of ground covers 300 square feet and has 400 rooms. The greater part has been uncovered and exposed to view of hundreds of tourists. The Pueblo on top of the ancient settler homes was erected some 10,000 years ago, and its front is protected by a high plaza, which could not be invaded by an enemy or wild beast after the ladders were taken up. The Painted Chamber. The builders lived in a primitive Stone Age, and all their implements and tools were made of stone. The rooms, when cleaned of debris, were found in a perfect condition, just as left by their last occupants. The ceilings were standing, and many objects were left intact by the former inhabitants. The most stunning room of the great Aztec Pueblo unearthed is the Painted Chamber. Dr. Clark Whistler states, "The room is in perfect condition, the interior plastered and painted in brilliant white, with dull red side borders and a running series of triangular designs. No room approaching this in beauty and perfection has ever been discovered in America. Here was the holiest sanctum or shrine of the prehistoric people. Herein is the sacred altar, with a sacred serpent carved in wood over the ceiling, of the finest workmanship. Nothing like it has ever been found before. Built first pyramids. It is beneath the ruins of this magnificent pueblo that the present excavations are being made by blasting holes through the solid floors and excavating the chambers of the long prior race of basket makers. Herein, the startling types of mummies are being found, described above. From these wonderful preserved mummies of 25,000 or perhaps 50,000 years ago, there is one significant inference. These people must have been the forefathers of the migratory race that crossed the then mainland of Atlantis and settled in Egypt. You guys hear this? These are the ancestors of the Egyptians. Truly, Egyptian primitive culture was born here. All right? This is the true old world. How many times, how many references, how many different people are going to tell you? And later perfected on the banks of the Nile. And remember, the true Nile, which means great river, is the Mississippi. We're just talking about the same place. It's all here. They're distracting you. They created a theme park over there. Here also began the art of pyramid structure. And Mexico has far larger pyramids than were built in Egypt, okay? Pyramid building, architecture, all that started here. Civilization, agriculture. We've already broken this down. Now the source telling you that pyramid structures, all right, the art of pyramid structures, that also began here. And our pyramids are larger than the ones in Egypt. Some of them in Yucatan, far more perfected with ornamentation, with many details. It was in one of these Yucatan pyramids that Le Plongeon unearthed a gigantic statue of Chacmol, which the Mexican government seized and took from him. Possibly our warrior emperor Tigrinis posed for it. And again, this is just an image of the excavation. Now remember, these cellars were found under the Pueblo ruins. It's a whole different generation. It's older than the Pueblo ruins that you see above. This is them excavating it. And it says here, the cover of the pothole tomb of Tigrinis, shown above, is of coiled basketry like a merry widow hat. At the left is a mummy of a sacred turkey. Then, as now, a bird of high degree, all right, the turkey, all right, the turkey. Below is a scene in the excavation yielding these wonderful finds. We're just talking about the first inhabitants of America, the original people, older than ancient Egypt, older than what we see over there on that side. All right, this is in the Washington Times, 1922. They're letting you know. Now, a lot of you guys know that throughout North America, Central America, South America, they have found many inscriptions, artifacts that they're saying resemble old world writings. And since they cannot tell you who the American Indians are, where they originated, they can't tell you that it wasn't American indigenous people that did all these petroglyphs and all these old world stone sculptures, tablets. What we're looking at right here, for example, this is the Redbird petroglyphs in Kentucky. Now, this rock art is not in its original place. We're going to read about why. And right here to the left, you guys can see a sign which is distinguishing a lot of the writing in here, supposedly. As you can see, one of them is first century Christian monogram. It says in Hebrew and Greek letters. It means Jesus Christ, Son of the Father, according to somebody, right? Then it says in Ogam Rebus. In the Gaelic language, it means the right hand of God. On the middle says sun disk and inscription of Ra, the Egyptian sun god. It's carved here by Nile mariners. It also says on the bottom Iberian Punic writing, Libyan style of Tunisia and Numidia, glyphs as well, South Semitic glyphs, and a sun disk, the symbol of Ra. All this is found in this rock art, and there's actually more stuff in there that they're leaving out. They're saying about 8 or 9 different old world scripts or languages in this rock from Kentucky. Just a little bit more on this inscription. It says here, Rock Art of Kentucky by Freddie Coy Jr., Thomas C. Fuller, Larry C. Meadows, James L. Swagger. This book actually goes over many petroglyphs inscriptions found throughout Kentucky, a lot of them showing old world similarities. For example, right here is showing you Mattingly rock shelter. The petroglyphs are in the inner facing portion of the boulder. All right, and then we're going to go to a zoomed in version right here, the Mattingly petroglyphs. You can see like very similar runic, like to Viking writing. You know, some can say that. Then you got the Tar Spring rock shelter showing large sandstone slab bearing petroglyphs. And this is right here, sandstone slab bearing the Tar Springs petroglyphs. All right. Here's a composite drawing of the petroglyphs. So we go to the Redbird River petroglyphs as we were just talking about. Now this is the rock before it actually fell into the highway we're going to read. This was its previous original location. So they put up a marker there, right, when they built this highway, and they try to say that this guy, this Chief Redbird, was the one who actually made the inscriptions, and that's totally false. Later on, they say, no, we didn't say that, but they clearly put it that the markings are attributed to him. So they are giving credit to him, trying to throw you off. We're going to read about that. It says, we first heard of this from Michael Hensley of Oneida, who, having been stimulated by a paper on Kentucky petroglyphs by one of us, visited the site and found the markings still clearly visible. At his invitation, we too examined the site and found the carvings on a vertical face of sandstone 16 feet above the road. And here they got a picture of it in its original location, okay? And again, this is the drawing they have right here. Drawing of the Redbird River petroglyphs. After inspecting the area, it appeared that Kentucky Highway 66 was graded to a lower level than the original ground surface. This was confirmed by Mr. Hensley, who told us that only a trail had existed previously. An estimate of the original surface would place the carvings at chest height. All right, so when they built the highway, they dug and brought the level down. So you used to be able to stand there and the rock would be right on your chest. Now, this is the part I wanted to go ahead and emphasize on this book. They admit that these carvings, right, these inscriptions were different from any of the previously reported Kentucky petroglyphs, very different, in that they were made up of sharply incised straight lines. No mention of Chief Redbird could be found in several early Kentucky histories published in the 19th century. Therefore, we contacted the Kentucky Historical Society and received the following letter. Wentworth, 1969. You will note that on our marker, we say that he was a legendary Cherokee Indian. There is much legend in the area, but very little of any specific nature, and no reliable dates are available. The only thing that we can do is guess that it occurred probably about 1780, 1800. That was when settlers were first coming into the area there, although they were very sparse. All right, so again, he just admitted in 1969, they made the whole thing up. They guessed when they made that marker, attributing it to this Cherokee. So again, they're admitting that they're guessing. They don't know, so they cannot tell you who really did it. They don't know, they're guessing. A series of well-preserved linear carvings on a sandstone ledge extending from the face of a small cliff in Clay County, Kentucky has been described. The antiquity of this petroglyph has not been established. They don't know how old it is. See, they cannot tell you it was made in the 1700s. But the legend concerning the origin has been alluded to. All right, the legend. All right, this is not Cherokee, this is actually old. But what happened is that on December 7th, 1994, the 50-ton stone bearing the petroglyphs fell from a sandstone cliff above the Redbird River onto the Kentucky Route 66. All right, in 94 it fell. So they actually moved it. It was transported to its present location in Rollins Stinson Park in Manchester, where it is roofed over and fenced. The original site was enrolled on the National Register of Historic Places. Under interpretations, it says a sign adjacent to the relocation stone in Manchester states that at least 8 Old World alphabets are engraved on it. These alphabets were extinct when Columbus arrived in the New World in 1492, so they didn't even have them around in Europe still. They were extinct already. That's how old these were. The alphabets are 1st century Greek and Hebrew, Old Libyan, Old Arabic, and Iberian Punic, which probably dates from the 9th century BC. Ogham, Germanic runes, and Tigfinagh, Numidian, are also on this stone. And again, you could just type in Redbird Petroglyphs and you guys can find it yourself. And again, this is where they have it now. After it fell onto the highway, they moved it over here. And they're preserving it because they know it's old. Continue waking up with analog. We got another cave system in Kentucky, even more grand than the Mammoth Cave system. Roads, rivers, and stone coffin Egyptian mummies. This is from 1878. A wonderful cave. Another wonderful cave has recently been discovered near Glasgow Junction, Kentucky. It has already been explored for a distance of 23 miles in one direction, called the long route, and 16 miles in another direction, called the short route. Do you guys hear how big this cave is? The avenues are very wide. A span of horses can easily be driven through for a distance of 11 miles. 3 rivers wide and very deep are encountered on the long route. One of them is navigable for 14 miles until the passages become too narrow to admit a boat. This forms the third or river route, which has to be explored in a boat. The cave is wonderful beyond description and far surpasses in grandeur the Mammoth or any other cave ever before discovered. Several mummified remains have been discovered in one of the large rooms. All right, they got mummies in here. They were reposing in stone coffins, rudely constructed, and from appearance may have been in this cave for centuries. They present every appearance of the Egyptian mummies. Okay, you guys hear that? Newspaper letting you know they found coffins in this cave, this immense cave in Kentucky, with Egyptian-like mummies. The owner of the cave, Thomas Kelly, is, or rather was a few days ago, a very poor man, struggling to make a payment on a farm of 24 acres, upon which, by mere accident, the entrance to this wonderful cave was discovered. He obtained about $400 for 3 of the mummies and is now offered $10,000 cash for the cave. You guys hear that? They're like, yo, give us the mummies so we can throw it in the European museums and say it came from the desert over there in Egypt, modern day Egypt. The newly discovered cave has been named the Grand Crystal Cave and is as beautiful as its name implies. Ladders and bridges are being constructed, and Mr. J.R. Puckett, a capitalist of the town, announces his intention of having a small steamboat constructed expressly for the purpose of navigating its wonderful rivers. Dispatch to the Cincinnati Commercial. All right, you guys hear that? This is an amazing report coming out of Kentucky, 1878. And as you guys saw here, he said he was going to build stairs and everything, making an attraction, I guess. And what happened? Where is this cave today? We got buried cities in Arizona, 1899. Again, buried Arizona cities. Great ruins where once lived a forgotten race. Indications that earthquakes killed many of their inhabitants and that the others fled, never to return. Artificial rivers dug with an infinite amount of labor. Phoenix, Arizona, July 31st. A petition is to be presented to Congress at its next session asking that steps be taken to protect the buried cities of a wonderful prehistoric race in southern Arizona. It is hoped that Congress will create a government reservation or park which will embrace several of the best preserved remains of large cities in the Gila Valley. The famous ruin of a prehistoric temple at Casa Grande has been successfully preserved by the creation of a government park of 4 acres. Without this protection, it would probably have been obliterated now. Many Americans familiar with the details of the unearthings of the temples at Nineveh and explorations at Babylon and Thebes have little or no knowledge concerning the remains of prehistoric communities in the west of their own country. They're talking about the United States. In the Gila and Salt River valleys of southern Arizona are relics of mysterious interest which baffle investigation, and they are being hacked to pieces and carried away piecemeal because Americans know little about them and the government does not care. You see, they're taking all these relics. A lot of the time it's their own government and they're bringing it over there to their museums, right? And talking about they found it in Egypt. They have been more rapidly effaced during the last dozen years than in the previous century. The ranchman and the farmer are clearing the land of prehistoric walls, again, prehistoric walls and excavations to sow wheat and alfalfa crops. Modern irrigation systems are demolishing aboriginal masterpieces of masonry, and curio hunters are hacking to pieces mural works and digging into ancient tombs, merely to get something uncommon to keep or sell. Every curio store in the Southwest has for sale great heaps of relics from Arizona's buried cities. All right, cities in plural, a lot of cities. On a broad sloping plain beginning at the confluence of the Gila and Salt Rivers, 42 miles from Phoenix, are the greatest ruins of the prehistoric towns. Some men of science say these towns were built in the Stone Age. Others say they existed 7,000 years ago. There are outlines of two towns among the sandy wastes that must have had populations of 40,000 and 50,000 each, while there are a half dozen other ruined towns of 20,000 population. Their builders had a high degree of engineering skill. Huge trees were transported to them from forests 60 miles away. Great masses of stone were brought from far off quarries for about 90 square miles. The Gila Valley is an aggregation of ruins, irrigation canals, the oldest known in the civilized world, irrigation canals, all right? So these are probably older than the ones in Caral Supeca, those were old, are found throughout the region, all right? The oldest canals in the world. We're just talking about a forgotten race in Arizona. And these are some of the canals they're talking about here, these prehistoric irrigation canals, possibly the oldest in the world. Touch the hijack here with their dating here, but it's just an example you guys can see. Ancient canals, canals of the Salt River Valley, Arizona Canal, Grand Canal, Crosscut Canal, Western Canal, Consolidated Canal, Eastern Canal, South Canal, Temple Canal, Highland Canal, Old Crosscut Canal, Maricopa Canal. Continuing another article regarding the same canal, says marvelous skill. These waterways were built with exactness and skill. The largest has been sadly torn to pieces in the last few years by the ranchmen, but it still shows the wonders of its construction. It has an average width of 7 feet. It is 60 miles long, and it terminates in reservoirs a mile long, half mile wide. Think of the enormous labor constructing such a canal and reservoir with stone implement and of carrying the excavated earth away in wicker baskets. But that is only one of 17 distinct prehistoric irrigation systems in the Gila Valley. The size of these canals gives some idea of the scale of which these people conducted their agricultural operations. They constructed an artificial river to supply the water which their crops required. They grew great quantities of corn, and they also raised beans as well as 2 or 3 varieties of squashes. Professor McGee of the Smithsonian Institution thinks it probable that they kept the guanaco in domestication, and evidences are found which indicate pretty certainly that they had turkeys. One may walk for miles in this region and find every foot of the sandy surface more or less mixed with pieces of broken pottery. The paint is still on them and is not in the least faded, though they have lain exposed for centuries. In the neighborhood of Tempe, an overflow from the Gila at some distant period washed against the ruins until they crumbled and were spread out level with the country. All right, something happened. You see that washed away. Back 10 miles from the Gila River, the ground is higher and was once the site of a city. Portions of the buried city wall by which it was protected are still standing, more than 20 feet in thickness. Inside are the mound-like ruins of the houses, which being less durable have crumbled. The buildings must have been very large, for in some instances the mounds are 300 feet in length by 200 in width and 20 in height. Much of the country is very little higher than the present bed of the Gila, and at one time a branch of that stream must have flowed into a basin which formed natural reservoir. There was a rise of about 10 feet at one point between the basin and the river, and the sandstone formation shows unmistakable signs of having been cut by artificial means, perhaps with the idea of assisting the entrance of the water by enlarging the passage. 5 canals lead out of the basin, all on the south and west, which confirmed the belief that it was once a reservoir formed chiefly by nature and used to store water against the periods of drought. We continue right here with another edition of the Ancient American Magazine, Archaeology of the Americas Before Columbus. This is issue number 68 of their collection. We'll go one of the articles in this magazine. It says here, the Anubis Caves. Evidence of Mithraism and Celtic religion in the Oklahoma Panhandle by Carl Lieberger. The Anubis Cave site located in the Oklahoma Panhandle is one of the most significant examples of Old World contact in the New World before Columbus. The epigraphy and mythology inscribed in this group of caves are interwoven into an elaborate Heliolytic apparatus precisely calibrated for equinoxes. Phrases in Celtic, Eshton Ogham, and Libyan script have been interpreted to refer to celebrations at equinox and mention Bel and Grian, Celtic names for the sun god. Remarkably, the Anubis Caves are amongst the best surviving records of the cult of Mithras, an old world religion that spanned the Persian and Roman empires. You hear that? It's the oldest surviving. So where did it originate? Gloria Farley was shown the site in 1978 by a local rancher. She then identified the dog-like figure in one of the caves as the Egyptian jackal god Anubis, hence the name Anubis Cave. All right, we already know Anubis is from America. That's the Shalot dog. Barry Feld provided translations to some of the inscriptions. Based on this translation, the presence of sun symbols, and the general orientation of the caves, it was predicted that the caves contained an equinox alignment involving light and shadow interplay. Another study reported that such alignments did, in fact, exist at the Anubis site. This work led to a more thorough treatment of the archaeoastronomy, cosmology, and mythology of the site in ancient American inscriptions. The primary source of information used in preparing this article, Scott Monahan of Denver, Colorado, produced a television documentary in 1984 and 1985 entitled History of the Rocks, which documents major features of the Anubis Caves. 20 years later, he has updated the story with a new documentary entitled Old News, which includes video documentation and commentary on the Anubis Caves.
The date is pulled out of the astronomy, and the astronomy verifies the inscription. Those two things make this unique. We have nothing like it anywhere in the country that I'm aware of.
Grian si mi tuegaun, jes ame mi chudele. This is Old Gaelic, and we're guessing at the vowels because the vowels aren't written.
It goes on to translate, the sun is 6 months in the pleasant north, in the gloomy south for the other months.
As the nose pointer shadow crosses the upper stem line on equinox, the forehead of the shadow above aligns with the first of 13 notches inside an eyebrow-like petroglyph.
They draw a line, as they did in the Book of Alimot, a late 14th century manuscript, which explains and translates the oath. As a matter of fact, it shows different types of oath.
This may be some of the most important artifacts found in our time in America. And these are artifacts. They're man-made objects left behind as a result of their cultural activity.
The more we learn, the more we know that in ancient times, people traveled all over the world, and their ships were excellent.
The U.S. Geological Survey came to investigate the crack caves' archaeoastronomy. A break in the clouds on the eastern horizon allowed only a brief sunlit observation shortly after sunrise.
We get more sun. I can see the disk. We got a sun disk.
Yes. We never know when we look at one of these sites for sure that what we're seeing was intended, but I think this is a fairly convincing site in terms of the interplay of the sunlight on the petroglyphs.
The light being focused on that area and the petroglyphs being within that area indicates that it most likely was put there with that purpose because of the time of the year and this day being equinox.
I can radiocarbon date the rock varnish, the dark coating that forms on rocks. That provides a calibration, and at the same time with the same sample, I determine the chemistry of it.
Based on the lab results, Dr. Dorn dates the Triogam to 900 BC and the Noble Twins inscription to 1000 BC.
The image of the two suns and the god sitting between the two suns, so the god is sitting at the point of the equinox. That's the position of Mithras.
To understand ourselves, we have to understand history, and we are looking at history here.
All right, you see that was a little promo of the documentary. You see this, a lot of people taking this very seriously. A lot of professors, people who actually study this stuff. Here's the Anubis inscription right here, or hieroglyphic. It says here, Philip M. Leonard has been studying the Anubis caves for over 25 years, along with William McGlone. He has co-authored dozens of papers on the subjects of ancient American inscriptions and petroglyphs. His most recent research on the Anubis cave is a monogram entitled A New World Monument to Mithras, which provides more thorough coverage of the material presented in this article. Leonard and Monahan are among the few researchers continuing to investigate and document the Anubis caves. Continue a little bit more ahead, it says, Mithras is often shown wearing a cape covered with stars. In Anubis cave too, he wears a cape and is positioned between a rising sun and a setting sun. 7 rays emanate from his head. Mithra is the ancient Irish word for the rays of the sun. The 7 rays may also relate to the 7 grades of Mithraic initiation. Each grade had its own set of teachings, represented by a celestial body and symbol, and each of these symbols is found on the Anubis panel. Porphyry, the ancient writer, assigned Mithra's proper seat as the line of the equinoxes. Very thorough little article here, showing you what's inside the cave and interpreting it. Again, they're telling you Celtic and Mithra religion. And we got Ogham writing as well. It says here, figure 7, the 6th month Ogham. And on the left here, cave 1 constellations. And some more drawings right here. Figure 8 Bel Ogham from Anubis cave 4. So there's many caves, not just one cave here. There are Ogham-like inscriptions in 5 of the Anubis caves. The first to receive attention was the 6th month Ogham in cave 3. It was originally translated by Fel, as the sun is 6 months in the north, in the south for the other months. Fel's early translation led to the original suggestion by John Polanski that the site was associated with the equinox. And then we got another here in figure 9, Libyan writing on the Anubis panel. All right, so we got Libyan over here too. So a lot of good research here. So it's not just one person saying this is so. There's a lot of people telling you these are old world inscriptions here. This is one of the most famous places in America, the Anubis cave. I wanted to bring this to your awareness in case you weren't aware of it. So you can do some further research if you like on the Anubis cave. Again, these are old world inscriptions found here in Oklahoma. It says here in the conclusion, the equinox alignments at the Anubis caves were not solely established for calendar keeping and calibrations. Instead, they were created as part of a complex monument involving the constellations interwoven into ancient mythology and cosmology. While ruins of several Mithraic temples or Mithraeums survive in Europe, none known to the author display the astronomical details, cosmology, and mythology found at the Anubis caves. Whoever inscribed them in Oklahoma had to know Ogham script, the Celtic language, astronomy, and Mithraic religious symbolisms in use over 1,500 years ago. All right, letting you know, America's the true old world. We had Casa Grande in Arizona, another article here speaking on it from 1893. Here we got a picture of Casa Grande. They're saying it's about 3 stories, but we're going to see how tall it really was when the Spanish supposedly got there. And as you can see, this old world building says here, Casa Grande ruins. A writer in the Native American who recently visited the interesting ruins of Casa Grande says, The ruins, which are roofless at the present time and 3 stories high, were, when discovered by the Spaniards, 7 stories and covered by a fine cedar roof, which was burned at the time of the Apache invasion. At the time of the building of the structure, cedar may have been grown in the vicinity, although now there is none nearer than 100 miles. There is no doubt but that they are the ruins of a citadel, which was the center of a city containing a population of fully 500,000, that's 500,000 people. A research society sent out from Washington a few years since, and excavating found 2 drinking vessels modeled in the fashion of the Chinese rattlesnake. This raised the question whether the people who inhabited the city were not of Chinese origin. The walls were built in 4-foot cubic blocks, in the manner in which the Mexican of today uses the adovera blocks, being built and dried upon the preceding one. In the center of the citadel are 2 cells, and in the walls are loopholes. All right, loopholes. We're talking about sports, a basket, a ball going through, which indicate the nature and use of the building. There are other and lesser ruins nearby. East of the ruins is a reservoir, which had a cemented bottom, the cement still being in a state of preservation, and was connected by a canal with the Gila River 40 miles away, all right? So you see, that canal connects to Casa Grande. This reservoir has cement in the bottom, so they even help, create this reservoir. You understand the sophistication, the advanced people that lived here in ancient times? Continuing out of Arizona, the southwest U.S., says here prehistoric stockyards. South of Phoenix on the Mesa are the ruined corrals or stock pens in which the animals of the inhabitants were kept. Many finds prove the purpose for which they were used. What the animals were is not so easily determined. On the slats found in ruins south of the Salt River are splendid figures of llamas. Okay, llamas. All right, in Arizona, llamas. Remember, llamas and camels did originate in North America, so it makes sense. In the ruins that have best withstood the exposure of the ages, many interesting specimens of the ceramic art have been found. Ollas of all shapes and sizes, or pots, runs containing the ashes of the dead, and jars partly filled with parched corn and beans are found in a remarkable state of preservation. It seems as if the entire city had been swept by a flood, and the earthen houses melted down, melted buildings. Listen to this: flood, mud flood, and melted down, melted buildings, melted houses. Shout out to John Levy, all right? Or shaken by an earthquake and toppled into 1,000 fragments. Something happened here, giving the inhabitants barely time to escape. Few of the skeletons that the amateur explorers have taken out show signs of mutilation or have broken bones. The people appear to have died of suffocation or some natural cause that left no mark upon the frame. In several spots where bones have been found, deeper digging has brought to light large quantities of bone dust, as fine and light as gunpowder. In one spot near Tempe, several tons of bone dust have been found recently lying in what appears to have once been a trench some 70 feet long and 2 feet deep, 9 feet below the surface of the sun-baked earth. The edges of the deposit of bone dust were broken and uneven, so that it could not mark a place of burial. The ruins, which may still be traced of the great communal or holy structure in the center of each of these larger prehistoric cities, all right? We're talking about cities. We're talking about hundreds of acres, right? We're talking about a lot of people here. We're talking about the true old world. Ancient civilizations here in Arizona are furnishing most abundant materials for research by the exploring scientists. At Los Muertos, this building is believed from the outline of ruins to have covered an acre. The Smithsonian ethnologists have reason to believe that the site of this temple is rich in buried relics. All right, you hear that? The Smithsonian is like, they got a lot of relics here. So we can guess what exactly happened to them, right? When the Smithsonian came around, they were so happy. It's like, there's a lot of relics here. They're always trying to debunk stuff and hide things. They wouldn't be so happy unless they were planning to go take them all, right? Which will reveal many facts concerning the mysterious race which lived and died there. The famous ruin, a pre-Columbian structure in Casa Grande, also in the Gila Valley, gives one an idea of what these communal structures may have been. The Casa Grande ruin was very much as it is now when Coronado and his conquistadores marched into Arizona from Mexico in 1540. It is composed of huge blocks of earth, averaging 4 feet long and 2 feet thick. The blocks were no doubt made on the spot and so well constructed that they have resisted perhaps 3,000 years of wear and tear, 3,000-year-old site in Arizona, from the elements, earthquakes, and the hackings by curious seekers. All right, Arizona. Just talking about a so-called forgotten race or buried cities here. So it's here, 7 buried cities. 7 buried cities. The expedition that worked during the winters of 1896, 97, and 98 under the patronage of Mr. Butum in the neighborhood of Mesa, a little town in the eastern part of Maricopa County, revealed vast possibilities for scientific investigation in these buried communities. The site of the investigations was what is known as the Mesa Grande, or Big Upland, between the 2 principal rivers in southern Arizona, the Gila and the Salt, whose combined current finds vent in the Rio Colorado at Yuma. One of the 7 buried cities, there is known as Las Acequias. It covers an area nearly 2.5 miles square and probably once had about 25,000 people. Exploration shows that the great artificial canals, all right, here we go again, great artificial canals, which were its arteries of commerce and agriculture, were elaborately terraced. All right, and remember, wherever you got agriculture, you got civilization. So they're talking about these artificial canals. These great artificial canals were elaborately terraced. They didn't just dig some waterway. They had terraces on these canals. Millions of cobblestones were used to retain the canal banks. An army of thousands of men and women must have spent months, perhaps years, in carrying loads of stones and wicker baskets on their backs from the distant places to the banks. The largest canal leading to Las Acequias consisted of a central ditch, 5 feet in width at the bottom and broadening above to 30 feet. It was 14 feet deep. It was 24 miles long. It terminated in a closed reservoir, 1 mile in length by half a mile wide. The construction of such a work nowadays would be no mean engineering enterprise. But the vastness of the undertaking by a little city where only stone implements for digging and wicker baskets for transportation were known is extraordinary, all right? So again, dodge the hijack, you see. Obviously, they had way more advanced technology and tools, most likely. The Botum explorations also revealed the interesting manner in which the mysterious race protected its canals against escapage of water therefrom. From water obtained at such physical expense is very precious in any community, ancient or modern. To render the clay beds of the canals impervious, it was first puddled and then, by means of burning brush and wood, gathered in that hot arid region only by the most arduous labor, it was burned to a terracotta consistency. The Batum expedition proved the fact that the prehistoric people used their canals for navigation. The enormous cedar timbers that are yet found in these wonderful towns came from mountains 5,000 feet high and about 70 miles distant. There was no way to get them to the places of their use but by floating them down the rivers and through the canals. The course of the smaller canals may now be traced, centuries after they have been filled with sand and vegetation, by means of small black pebbles placed along the inner banks by the inhabitants. All right, and that's how they are able to see the smaller canals. It keeps going, but we don't have that part. But just another one so you guys can see what they were finding in this area of Arizona. We continue waking up with analog, and again, we're just talking about prehistoric towns. We're going to continue talking about these canals in this area of Arizona. We got another newspaper article here. It says here, along the main canal, the exploration of Professor Adolphus E. Bandelier and Mr. Butum show clearly that these prehistoric towns extended along the sides of the main canal for a great distance in proportion to their width and were situated on the outer edge of the cultivated tract. which included all the intervening land to the river. The towns all consisted of enormous central citadel or temple buildings within clusters of dwellings and walled enclosures, which in turn were surrounded by the thatched huts of the laborers. Stone and sun-dried bricks were used as building material, and main earthen walls were formed within a framework of timber and wattled cane. Thus, their architecture was derived, like their pottery, from original basket types. The best preserved walls showed that the houses were in large communal blocks, 300 or 400 feet long by 200 feet wide, and possibly larger, built 3 or 4 stories high, of adobe bricks without admixture of straw. They were situated near the canal or its branches, were sometimes provided with a special reservoir, and in all cases had 1 or more pits or ovens for cooking purposes. The walls were probably protected from climate influences by cement of some kind. The citadel structure are thought, from the thickness of the walls and the amount of debris, to have been 6 or 7 stories high, and to have been used in times of war as a place of refuge. All right, again, a place of refuge. And each city was also another large public edifice, oval in form, 40 or 50 feet in diameter, and conjectured to have been a temple of the sun. Representations are found in the rock inscriptions and in terracotta images of an animal that was undoubtedly used as a beast of burden. This beast resembled the llama of South America. Spanish writers at the time of the conquest by Cortez and Pizarro speak of the existence of woolen cloth among Pueblo Indians, and as nothing has been disclosed indicating contact with the whites, it is presumed that these people had domesticated the llama. All right, letting you know they had the llama here in the Southwest. If this is so, it establishes a connection between these people in Arizona and the Peruvians. It also proves that either these prehistoric Arizona people were of great antiquity, or else there existed an animal of the llama species in North America much later than is supposed by natural historians. The 27 skeletons that the Bottom expedition secured, and the hundreds of others that curio dealers and museum men have dug up, show that the peoples were small in stature and that their skulls were brachycephalous, or broader across than lengthwise, like those of the Sunnis, Aztecs, and Peruvians. Some of the skulls have a little extra bone in the back part of the head, a peculiarity of the Incas, and known as the Inca bone. This fact indicates a close relationship between the mysterious race in Arizona and the civilization of South America. I'm going to read from this magazine real quick. It's the Ancient American, Archaeology of the Americas Before Columbus. We're in volume 8, number 54, all right, issue 54. And we're reading this article, Connecticut's 5th Century Church. In the stillness of Cacapons State Forest, southern Connecticut, near the town of Guilford, masterfully carved from solid rock, stands North America's oldest Christian church. Recent epigraphic evidence found here suggests that it is 1,500 years old and linked to a voyage of Christian Byzantine monks who fled from North Africa during the 5th century in the wake of the Vandal invasions. Greek and North African inscriptions, Greek copal patterns in the form of chrismons, monograms of Christ, baptismal fonts, a cathedral or throne, candelabras, and an altar have been found at the site. These items indicate that it was a place of worship, an early Christian church. The artifacts are illuminated by Libyan Arabic texts found at Figu Haj Minmon, a remote oasis in eastern Morocco in 1926. They tell of a voyage undertaken by North African Christian monks sailing toward the setting sun to Ask Shamal, the northern land, suggestive of North America. A diffusionist scholar, Frederick J. Pohl, who studied the Figuic inscription during the 1960s, placed the monks' arrival in North America at about 480 AD. All right, so you hear what they're saying? They're saying that what they're finding here in Connecticut, these relics of writing, matches with the story of somebody leaving North Africa, people who would have known that writing. What if they got it in reverse? What if they learned that here and took it to North Africa? This image right here, real quick, it says main altar with Greek Doric style plinth. To the left is fish-shaped cupola holes pattern. Both hold candles for ceremonies. And then this one says flame-shaped baptismal font representing the Holy Spirit. Here the elderly were baptized by pouring water over their heads. So how do they know it's representing the Holy Spirit, right? They add in their little Christian hijack here. Here we got another image. It says here overflowing fountain, sculpture containing fishes. The fishes are the newly baptized Christians swimming in the waters of eternal life. So this is their interpretation of what they're finding here. This is what they're saying, a map of early Christian church site in Connecticut. And again, they're saying they're finding all these symbols, Christian symbols, and that whole Greek Christian New Testament period, right? And again, this is what they're saying they're finding here. The cupola pattern in the shape of a fish. There's many articles on this, Byzantine church or stonemason doodling. So here's a picture of it in color. These are the ruins. So there's a lot of, in New England, a lot of stone ruins, megalithic ruins, you know, what appears to be what they would call Celtic, Druid, Viking. There's something else from the side, as you guys can see. They're saying they used to baptize people in this. The Byzantines beat the Vikings to America by 500 years, by John Gallagher. So a main altar with Greek Doric style plinth. All right, so this is what they're finding in Connecticut, guys. So there's a lot of articles written. Of course, they don't teach you about this stuff, and they keep it hidden. A handful of dust, Wyoming, 1891. Remains of a prehistoric king, a monarch of an unknown age. Prehistoric race unearthed, again in Arizona. Here's the article, a handful of dust. It is all that remains of a prehistoric king. A valuable archaeological find in Arizona, evidently the tomb and remains of a monarch of an unknown age. Among the most valuable discoveries ever made on the American continent, from an archaeological standpoint, is the tomb of a prehistoric race recently unearthed at the village of Crittenden, Arizona. The workmen had penetrated at some 8 feet below the surface of the ground what they took to be stone of a soft, friable nature, but which was evidently masonry of very superior workmanship. When they reached the tomb itself, this was composed of large square blocks of stone, which was identified as red or rose granite, and cemented together with such skill as to at first cause the whole measuring 12 by 15 feet to appear as a solid mass. The opening of this, while very difficult, as the use of powder was prohibited by Mr. Hendrickson, who, as a learned archaeologist, was placed in charge of the exhumation by the authorities, was accomplished by night, when the interest and curiosity of the party was so great that the work was continued by lamplight till dawn. The tomb, when opened, was found to contain a gigantic image of a man lying at full length and made of clay mixed with a sort of preparation which gives it a bright blue color and a slight elasticity, the whole appearing to have been subjected to great heat. The image represents the naked figure, except for a very tight girdle about the waist, a pair of close-fitting sandals, and a crown on the head shaped very much like a bishop's mitre, but topped with the head of a hawk or eagle. The features are roughly molded out of an imperious cast and of a man in middle age with a prominent nose and a very wide mouth, but with cheeks bone so low as to preclude all idea that the original could have been an Indian. The hands, which are as small as a woman's, and bear on the backs the head of the bird as on the crown, are crossed on the breast and hold an image about 3 inches long of a squatting figure, probably that of a god. The feet are also crossed, the right presenting the peculiarity of possessing a 6th toe, which the sandal is cut to bring into prominence as if the owner had prided himself on it. The hair of the image is dressed in thick curls on both sides of the head, reaching to the shoulders and brought down to the brow of the forehead, all right, thick curls. Careful examination of this clay figure revealed that it was merely the elaborate coffin of the real body and could be opened from the back. This was done with the possible care so as to not disturb the remains within. Do you guys hear that? So this was the actual coffin, like a whole clay molding of a person, but it was actually the coffin. But a few handfuls of dust, dark brown and almost impalpable powder was all that. I guess is all that was found. And then it says here, the crown is of thick red gold, carved with minute but well executed drawings representing battle scenes, triumphal marches and other pictures, the meaning of which is somewhat misty. But in all, the principal figure is that of a man with 6 toes on his right foot. The workmanship of the whole crown is very fine, and the bird's head on top of it is a masterpiece worthy of Cellini. It holds in its mouth a magnificent chalchuitis or green diamond, valued by the Aztecs, which shows some attempts at lapidification. The girdle found is composed of plates of gold arranged like scales and very thin, so as to give with every movement of the wearer's body on each of these plates, which is in shape of a half ellipse, is engraved a figure or hieroglyphics, conveying, however, no hint of their meaning in their form. The image of what is presumably a god is made of clay combined with the preparation spoken of before, and also burned till thoroughly hardened. It represents a male being seated on a pedestal in a squatting posture, its eyes squinting and grinding in hideous mirth, while both hands are placed over the ears as if to shut out sound. A peculiar thing about this image is that its hair is represented as hanging down its back in one long plait like a Chinaman's. The figure is hollow, but contains only a half a dozen small black pebbles, highly polished, and a somewhat larger stone of a dull gray hue. The coffin and these relics are to be donated to the State Museum of History and Archaeology at Tucson. All right, so what happened to this? No clue of any value as to what race the remains are to be ascribed can be found, but it is probable that it was one antedating the Aslan and even the mound builders. They're talking about this is older than Aslan and the mound builders, and superior to both in knowledge of masonry, sculpture, and the working of metal. Right, so again, this is what they're finding in Arizona in 1891. We have a wonderful discovery here out of Missouri, 1879. Discovery of a cavern cut in solid rock. It says here, a wonderful discovery. Vicini's Indiana Sentinel. On yesterday, an old gentleman by the name of Shasiri, living about 8 miles southeast of here, in that section known as Chimney Pierce Hills. The name was derived from an ancient pier or pillar of stone, now partly destroyed, about 15 feet high, shaped like a chimney and having a sunken square in the base as though designed for a fireplace, supposed by many to be a relic of those wonderful prehistoric people, the mound builders, came to this city and detailed their wonderful discovery, a cavern cut in the solid rock or bluff, which, if anything like represented, will take its place among the most remarkable and wonderful of archaeological discoveries. As we learn the story, Mr. Shashiri started out early this morning to seek a sheep which had strayed away from the flock. He was penning for the purpose of shearing, following along the basil's skirting an immense table of rock, known from the first settlement of the country as Chimney Pier. He heard the faint bleating of a sheep, apparently from behind a great standing splinter torn from the mass, probably by a thunderbolt, and detached until a broad fissure parted the two. Thinking the animal had become entangled in this fissure, he sought to slip, and it's a little confusing, just says, and prepared, and the fragment next to the precipitous bluff, when he lost his hold and fell some 15 feet, aligning temporarily on the edge of a smooth, flat stone concealed in a dense undergrowth. So basically, the man was looking for his sheep. He fell somewhere about 15 feet Judge of his alarm as he found this platform under his feet slowly swinging like a trapdoor, letting him down in the depths of the earth. The shock of the fall was such as to deprive him of all power to catch and save himself. In a few seconds he found himself in a vestibule cut out of the solid rock, and the walls of which were adorned with most vividly colored drawings of men and animals. The ceiling, which was dome-shaped and about 11 feet above the floor, was adorned with the figure of a giant-sized man, placing faggots in a figure designed to represent the sun. All right, this is what he's finding when he fell in this kind of cave, I guess, 15 feet below. This is what he's finding here. This is what he's reporting. The sides bore in black and brown colors. Delineations of animals he says he never saw, even pictured huge tusked and trunked beasts like elephants. All right, there was even elephants drawn on the walls with masses of shaggy hair falling about their heads and shoulders. Great cats, he says, striped like tigers and with tusks hanging over their lips like walruses. In the midst of this throng of wild beasts upon a yellow background is delineated the form of a man seated in some kind of a vehicle, much like, from Mr. Shashiri's description, an ancient Roman chariot. All right, this is what he's seeing in this cave that he fell in, this temple he fell in. The whole of these chariot paintings bear inscriptions which, of course, Mr. Shashiri could not read. On one facade of this prehistoric temple, the unknown artist had depicted birds and fowls, curious and gorgeous, score after score of them, says Mr. Shashiri, none of which he could recognize as now common in this country. The colors he describes as peculiarly and charmingly bright. The surrounding country is rich with relics of this curious and unknown race, and throughout the country are many evidences of the advanced condition of civilization they had attained. All right, again, this is what they're finding here. And again, this was in Missouri, 1879, Missouri. A wonderful discovery. 3,000 years ago. Findings of implements and fossils of early man in pre-glacial rock layers were cited by scientists of the last century, 1800s, not only in the gold-bearing layers of California, but around the world. But before leaving the United States for other fossil sites, it would be good to recall the so-called Nampa image. All right, you guys, this is very interesting, this part right here, the Nampa image. I know a lot of you probably already know, have heard about it. It's one of those out-of-place objects that they want to just say it's fake, but they can't really prove it. We're going to talk about it. Again, it says the so-called Nampa image found at Nampa, Idaho in 1889. Holmes is a very respected scholar at that time, says reported that this minute clay figure is said to have been brought up by an artesian well sand pump from late Tertiary or early Quaternary age. Lang's 1893, page 385, more lengthy report says that the image was brought up from an artesian well, which had a lava cap 15 feet thick and about 200 feet of quicksand and clays. Put some music on. Yeah. Where we gonna go? That's the name of the song. Where we gonna go from here on? Yeah. Where we gonna go now? Yeah. This is the Nampa. The little Nampa clay figure. All right, this is very controversial clay figure. Very popular amongst conspiracy theorists. So it says here, the Nampa figurine remains a controversial artifact. All right. We're looking at the, again, Nampa clay figure. All right. It says here, Lane's detailed account of the findings of the Nampa image relates how the ancient land surface, now covered over by more than 200 feet of sands, clays, and lava, correspond to the California gravels in geologic age. The small clay figurine was encrusted with grains of iron oxide like the clay balls found in the sand, which seems to bear conclusive evidence of its great antiquity. The entire 11th chapter of Lane's book is on the subject of Tertiary man. So if you doubting it, look up Lane's book. That's a famous scholar. Look it up. Real science. the same pseudo. They just can't admit to it, but they won't say it's fake. Just before we continue, I got a little video here. It's fair use for your caboose, fair use. You know, this is for education only. We're just trying to build and learn here for commentary and criticism. All right, so no one gave us no copyright because this is fair use. All right, we're talking about the Nampa figurine.
Well, onto a news story today. A tiny figurine found in Nampa has for many years sparked a whole lot of controversy. This is pretty interesting. Is it one of the area's most interesting archaeological discoveries, as some people claim? Or is it one of the biggest hoaxes in Idaho history? Well, I dug into the mystery behind what's become known as the Nampa image. It's July of 1889. Several men drill for water in what at that time was the very small town of Nampa. Reports say they were drilling down about 320 feet when this tiny clay figurine surfaced. It's the crude figure of a woman, only about 1.5 inches long, with what appears to be one leg broken off.
It's really fragile, it's really small. Nothing like that's ever been found that deep anywhere in North America, let alone in Idaho.
The figure, which is now known as the Nampa image, is housed here at the Idaho Historical Museum. You can see it actually if you just call ahead and make a special request. But where did it come from? Some say Native Americans made it thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of years ago, but we may never know for sure.
The scientific community of the time spent a lot of time arguing and debating what it was, and no conclusions were ever come to.
And even today, experts have no real proof of its age.
We assume it was made sometime in 1889, when the guys made it. Somebody made it. It's not ancient in any way, but there's no way to date it. It's made out of clay and sand, and you can't get radiocarbon dates or anything like that with it.
The Nampa image is so small that if you test it, it's going to have to be destroyed. And so that's something we don't want to do because it's a record of the past, and we're really interested in keeping it in the collection.
The so-called discovery of this Nampa image made a lot of news back in that day, as word spread that the well drillers had found an object of, quote, considerable antiquity.
And then in a sense, the story kind of got away from them. We don't know why they did it. We don't have any motives for why they would say this or do it. We just don't think it was true at the time.
So the question remains, will we ever know where the Nampa image really came from?
No, we never will.
Subline.
But we will never know for sure.
Subline.
Rachel Garceau, today's 6 on Your Side.